Okay, well, we are going to begin because we have an awful lot to speak about. I'm Michelle Goldsmith. I'm the VP/GM of Soundings Trade Only. If you don't know me, welcome back to the 3Ts Summit. A year ago, we sat down to talk about tariffs and trade and taxes. And if the last 12 months are any guide, we are clearly not out of material. Since then, we've seen tariffs imposed. We've seen the tariffs struck down by the Supreme Court and replaced within hours with a different law. We've had a new tax bill that's actually helped some of the boat builders. We have a very fragile truce over the Strait of Hormuz that's being tested with the bombing that's starting to happen again. And we have an election year that's happening in the U.S. So my job for the next hour is fairly easy. I'm going to let these four intelligent people who live this every day across 3 continents tell you exactly what this means for your business. I want to thank Brunswick Corporation for their sponsorship and support of this event. We've also created a one-sheet for you that is if you click on the handouts at the top, it's a one-sheet that tells you a timeline of what's happened, what to look out for, what to be alerted about right now. And then it gives you 6 action items that you can take within the next 2 quarters within your own businesses. So again, that's in the handout section. Feel free to click on it, download it. That's meant for you. So with that said, let me introduce our panel. So first we have Philip Easthill. He is the Secretary General of the European Boating Industry, or EBI. We have Marie-France McKinnon, who is Executive Director of NMMA Canada. We have Clay Crabtree, who is the Acting Vice President of Public Policy and Government Relations at NMMA. And we have Lee Gordon, who is the Chief Communications and Government Affairs Officer at Brunswick Corporation. Welcome, everybody. So we are going to start at the beginning. What's gone on in the last 12 months? So looking over the past 12 months, as I had said, we've had tariffs rising. I think, Lee, you and I spoke last year, and you said it's like whack-a-mole. Every time you think you figured out a different source, it changes. Then we had some of the tariffs struck down by the Supreme Court. We've had yet another law. We've had tax and trade provisions in what was deemed the big, beautiful bill. We've had tariff rates between the U.S. and different markets around the globe just change multiple times along the way. So what I wanted to ask each of the panelists is, from where you sit, what has been the single best development of the year and what has been the single worst? And Philip, I'm going to start with you. So from a European perspective, what's been the best and what has been the worst? I can tell you from what I saw, because I know that you run the Blue Innovation Dock at Dusseldorf, more so than ever before, as I watched your members of the EU Parliament and others from the European Union on stage, there was such a sense of unification. I think a stronger sense of unity than I had ever seen from the EU. So if you want to speak to what you think was the best and the worst of the last year, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Michelle. Good to be here. So I think, as you say, I look at it a bit from the outside. I don't have to live with it as much every day, but looking at it from the outside and looking at it from the perspective of our members, the businesses, starting with the single worst, I think we can probably all agree it's the accumulation of uncertainty in the last period, which is just very negative for industry, for long-term decision-making. We can see a lack of decision-making with constant changes of legal bases and all of these growing issues. But I don't want to dwell too much on that. I'm sure my colleagues here will talk about that as well. But I think the single best aspect, and you talked about it already, is that there's a much greater unification and common approach of the EU and its member states, the national countries, to also understand what is the purpose of trade policy. And the purpose of trade policy is to drive support for industry and jobs at the end of the day, and support all of those financing that is needed in a modern society, in a modern state. So now it's really more about using all of this as a geopolitical tool and strategically. So, for example, and we're going to talk more about it later on, but We now have an agreement finally with the Mercosur region in South America between the EU and Mercosur. And this is something that was started in the 90s to be negotiated. It was on and off, on and off, on and off for that entire period of time. And it took 25 to 30 years to negotiate. And now, because of all of these developments that we've seen, there has finally been a push to say, okay, we need to move past these small petty issues. Who gets a small advantage here and there, and just see the bigger picture, and how can we move ahead and find allies and be positive. So that's been really positive. The other aspect, looking at it from our industry, in the last couple of years, we've really managed to get boating and the yachting industry and all of this nautical industry recognized as a strategic sector for the EU for the first time. So that's been really positive to, like you say, to get all of those people here from Brussels to come to our boat shows and to show really what our industry is about and what they can do to support us. So I think that's kind of my takeaway.
Yes, and just for the people on the call, the Mercosur area that you're talking about, Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil,
and Argentina.
And Argentina. Thank you. How could I forget Argentina? They're playing today. So moving on, Marie-France, what is your, from your perspective, best and worst from the last year?
Well, from a Canadian marine perspective, the best development for us was the repeal of the federal luxury tax on boats. So it removed a policy that really distorted buying decisions, weakened Canadian dealers, and shifted business really outside of the country, where we're seeing sales, lost to Canada because they were just crossing the border to buy their boats in the US. So this also proved that, sustained evidence-based with good data advocacy can really change government policy. So that's definitely the best that we've had for the past year. So it was great to see that that policy repealed in the budget 2025 from Prime Minister Carney. The worst development has been, I think, the normalization of trade uncertainty that everybody's dealing with. So Supreme Court settled on one legal question by ruling that IEEPA doesn't authorize tariffs, and a refund process is underway, but the US moved quickly to other tariff authorities. So, business got legal clarity on one side, but no commercial predictability. So, and that certainly extends to CUSMA or USMCA. Because the U.S. didn't agree to extend the agreement on July 1st, there's now an annual joint review that's required by the parties. So, you can't plan a business around rolling uncertainty. That's the real cost. And, the impact is really, I think, at the dealer confidence level. So when policy is uncertain, when trade is uncertain, dealers hesitate on inventory decisions, but consumers also hesitate at the point of purchase. So I think that's where the economic damage actually shows up.
Absolutely. And we'll get into that more in detail as we go through. Clay, from your perspective, from the NMMA and the US's perspective, best and worst.
Well, thanks, Michelle, for having us and for the opportunity for NMMA to be here today. But I would say for the best development, and while it is small and incremental steps, I would say earlier this spring, the Department of Commerce here in the U.S., they did remove some products that are essential to manufacturing from the Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs, which provided relief to manufacturers. And so you're starting to see, while it is small, some, momentum there. We continue doing that outreach all the time to commerce and to other agencies to educate them as to the effect that especially the Section 232 tariffs are having on the industry. And this was related to certain components for engines, plus they reduced some tariffs on certain HVAC component parts. And so that was certainly positive and welcome news in an ever-changing environment that we've seen over the past 18 months. I would say on the worst development side, kind of similar theme. It's primarily the uncertainty that the ever-changing trade policy has on businesses' ability to plan for the future. The overall cost of tariffs to the industry has certainly, has had an impact with it being increases. And we've had certain manufacturers that reported cost of some aluminum and some of their products has caused a 75% increase since 2024.
That's incredible. 75% increase in cost.
Right. So we've heard that from certain manufacturers. And so that has certainly been, I would say, the worst development in our eyes.
Absolutely. And Lee, from your perspective, your company builds components and it builds boats, and you're a technology company. So I would think that this has had, and you're a global company, you manufacture all over the world. So from your perspective, how, what was your best and what was your worst?
I think that despite all the bad news in the world and inflation's high, interest rates are high, all the bad things, we are still seeing people buying boats. And while it looks different and it feels different, some of those premium boats are still doing really well. If we look back to some of the boat shows, the Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, Dusseldorf, Miami, of course, people are still buying boats. So there are some encouraging signs there. I think the thing that probably, if at the risk of repeating what the others said on the positive, maybe I'll go a different direction with it, is just a few weeks ago, and working closely with Clay and others too, we were able to get our first real bill, introduced recently with the boat loan interest with Congressman Yakam, and this has been a year in the making. Now it's not final and it's not been passed by any means, but we have to get that value customer back in, and anything that we can do to spur the interest and to spur domestic manufacturing and to get people back in, or for first-time buyers is a great thing. Like on the negative side, I think that the others have mentioned it too. It's just the instability. It's you wake up every day. What's on Truth Social today? What's on CNBC today? What kind of light are we chasing today? Because you've got the 301s and the 232s and other numbers that are coming out of left field. And it's hard to understand truly what it is that you're chasing that day. So you almost have to just say, at the very beginning, every day was an adventure. Now we know what we need to do. And no matter what comes at you, you just kind of run the playbook, you run the strategy, and you figure it out, because it is going to be here. Tariffs are going to be here for a long time, no matter who is president, no matter who's in the administration. So it's just, how do we best deal with it?
Absolutely. And, kudos to all of the people in supply chain that are working their way through this, because it's got to be incredibly difficult. In terms of the bill that was introduced, the loan interest bill, do you want to give a little bit of detail as to what was just proposed?
Yeah, so it very much models the auto loan. So you remember when President Trump was running for re-election, if you will, he kept talking about no tax on auto loan interest, no tax on tips. We tried very hard at that time to get boats, RVs, other forms of transportation in, and weren't able to. Now we're trying to get that in. So if you're a family, a double filer of $200,000 or a single filer of $100,000, you basically get the opportunity to get a tax break on a boat loan. So, we do a lot of work, all of the OEMs do a lot of work on advertising and rebates and discounts, but this is that, except the government will pay for it in a sense. So it's our way of just saying, auto gets their seat at the table all the time. There's always a spotlight on auto or agriculture. So what about our industry? Where do we fit into that? And so this is just step one of hopefully many steps of working with the government. I do think, and we talk about this later, but if advocacy is done well, advocacy can help grow boating. And we're starting to see a little bit of that right now. We've only scratched the surface, but there's a lot of work to do, but it's a great sign and a great step forward.
I think all of your panelists will agree with that statement. So I'm going to stick with you, Lee, for a minute. So you are a global manufacturer. I'm curious how, and I know David, when he was on stage in earlier this year, talked about the fact that you had actually used AI modeling to do some of this supply chain work. But, how are you navigating sourcing and production decisions across multiple, sometimes conflicting tariff regimes over the last 12 months? And my second question to you is, have you gone through the process of trying to get the tariff refunds which is a process that I think people are starting to go through based on the Supreme Court ruling. So if you have any words of wisdom for other companies that might be going through or starting the process, if you could be specific about kind of the way that you've done your strategy or your decision making on that, that would be great.
So you said it earlier, the supply chain team are the unsung heroes of the past 24 months. So they are absolutely incredible. I don't know how they do what they do and do it in the ways that they do it, but they do such an incredible job. I think we are fortunate in that we have close to 60 brands. And so we are able to have our 4 divisions work together. So if Mercury has something and one of our boat group needs something, we're able to work a lot closely together on the supply chain front of it. So if there's a vendor we're going to work with, we're able to, share some of those notes and talk about, who do we want to work with, who's doing what. But I do believe that the very beginning of it all, it was hard because these countries were on the bad list today, but then 3 of them left tomorrow, but then 14 were added the next day, and then 30 were. So you don't even know where you're getting things from, that you're going to get these extra tariffs and what's going to be put on you. But it has forced all of us, certainly in the United States, to really think about how do you get some of those components back in the U.S. So Mercury's, the only U.S. outboard engine manufacturer. We've got a great head start there, but there's some components we had to figure out how to get and where to get them from. And is it 20% tariff? Is it 50% tariff? Is it 100% tariff? Is it no tariff? And that changed all the time. So there was this, it's almost like, playing fantasy football. You got your big draft board and you got to figure out who you're going to draft and who you're going to take and who you're going to pick. And somebody else drafts somebody else. So you got to figure out something else. And you have to have plan A, B, and C with all of this. It can't just be, we're doing it one way and one way only. You've got to have A, B, and C. You've got to be able to pivot quickly. And, that is something that we all did, but I believe we've all really strengthened our ability to pivot. So that's one. In terms of the refunds that you mentioned, that is the $1 million question right now, because we're all trying to read through this. We've, talked to other companies, have talked to other communication leaders who are peers of mine and saying, what are you doing and how are you doing it? And there's a lot of fine print to read. So more to come on that. But in terms of my recommendation would be read all the fine print, make sure that, the dates line up, because if you miss it by a day, you don't qualify for this, but you do qualify for this. And so like everything, it's a little bit discombobulated. So with everything you do, and if you are applying for tariff refunds, or if you're thinking about it, make sure you work with your legal team and have them vet everything and look everything, and make sure you highlight all the dates, because the dates are so important. Because I've talked to others who have missed the dates and now they've got to go all the way back to the beginning again. So I would just say be very thorough in everything that you do. And like everybody, we're still trying to figure out what the actual process is right now.
I think everyone is at this point. And I again, kudos to the supply chain people, but also to the production people, because as you have to go to, at this point, I would think everyone has multiple sources for different parts, especially key parts. But those multiple sources may not be building identical products. So in terms of keeping your ultimate finished product, the quality where you need it to be, it's got to be a task on production as well. So, Clay, I'm going to go to you. So let's talk a little bit about the Section 122 tariffs. They're scheduled to expire on July 24th, just over a week from today. There is a federal circuit appeal pending, but if they don't come to a ruling before July 24th, it's kind of a moot point. So, from a policy standpoint, and Leah, I'll go back to you from an operational standpoint. What contingency planning is realistic when legal keeps shifting its ground? I mean, I think you had said that if 122 doesn't work, they're going to go to 301. So different number, more tariffs.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in and go first, Michelle. But I think it's a great question, and I mean I think that's spot on. I think businesses need to expect tariffs to continue, and as Lee mentioned, they are planning for that. USTR has Section 301 investigations that are currently in process that are intended to continue at these same, Section 122 tariff rates at either 10% or 12.5%. And that's for over 60 countries. There's I think it's around 80 investigations right now that USTR is conducting. And, these 301 tariffs are expected to better withstand legal scrutiny and challenges. If you'll recall, Section 301 is the same mechanism and authority that the administration used in the first Trump administration to put in place tariffs on imports from China. And those have been in place since 2019. And Lee brought up a good point that, it doesn't matter the administration. Those came in 2019. And while the previous administration, they may have worked out some agreements to suspend Section 232 tariffs on aluminum and steel, these Section 301 tariffs have remained in place since the first Trump administration. And so they're expected to have a little bit better withstanding, I think, when it comes to some of the scrutiny that you can expect.
Lee, I think we went through this from an operational standpoint, but if there's anything that you want to add in terms of the legalities of it.
I think Clay hit it really well. We've all we're going to go under the assumption that we're not going to wake up tomorrow morning and tariffs are going to be wiped off the table. We understand that, and not just from our industry, but in everything we do and everything we buy in our daily lives, it is a bit more expensive. I'm here this week at ICAST in Orlando. It's a hot topic of conversation about the increase in prices in fishing poles, bait, tackle, and how do you handle that and how do you work with that? I'm interested to see what some of the sentiment is when I hit the floor later today, but I think it's just expected at this point that these are going to stay. And then how do we try to work through it and make sure that we're telling the right story and working with NMMA and others when we go do Hill visits and we go talk to Commerce and USTR to say we make people happy. We're not doing any. We're boating. We're trying to make dreams come true here. We're not the bad guys in all of this. And obviously, we would love an exclusion, or you'd love to see them wiped off the table. But as we sit here, in mid-July, I believe we're going to be seeing these for quite some time.
Yeah. Clay, I'm going to go back to you, and Marie-France, feel free to chime in as well, because I'll come to you after. But the USMCA or CUSMA, all of the anachronisms that we love, the joint review on July 1 ended without a renewal. So this is the Mexico-Canada-US trade agreement, which has been in place for quite some time. And because there was no resolution by July 1st, we're now switching from, a review period that's much longer to one that's now annually through 2036. So what should manufacturers and suppliers be doing right now to prepare for a trade relationship that gets relitigated every year instead of every 6? And I think about some of our colleagues that manufacture in Mexico, manufacture in Canada. I think about, as Marie-France said, the dealers and the boat builders. So how can our industry better prepare for that?
Yeah, and thanks for that. I mean, I think, for one, the review hasn't ended just yet. Talks primarily with Mexico are still ongoing. Manufacturers recommend is continuing working with their associations like NMMA and USTR directly to ensure that their priorities and manufacturing's priorities are continuing to be communicated to the government, especially for an industry like ours that's a uniquely American industry, and we have such a strong, I would say, supply chain and trade relationships, certainly between Canada and Mexico, and Canada is our top export market. And so we've been engaged with the administration directly over the past year, meeting, directly with the Department of Commerce, USTR officials, testifying before several agencies, and really reiterating our support for USMCA, focusing on enforcing the current agreement rather than revamping it. And so we've been reiterating that, directly to the administration, but also to key members of Congress, and especially those oversight committees like House Ways and Means, to Senate Finance committees, but making sure that they're aware of our industry's strong support for this. And when you look across different sectors, you'll see we're not alone in this. It's pretty, it's a very popular agreement amongst, so many different sectors across the business landscape. And so we'll continue doing that. And we would just encourage manufacturers to continue working with folks like NMMA, so that we're able to communicate any sort of tweaks or any sort of stories that you would like us to share and tell. We can help do that and deliver that directly to the administration.
So as you're speaking with the administration and you're going up to the Hill to speak to them, what has the response been or the reception been? Are they more inclined to change it, or are they, pretty happy with the way that the bill is today?
They're certainly receptive to what we're having to say. I think one of the things that they have to balance, and I know we'll get into this perhaps later when we talk about, what happens in November, but they have to really balance with how much, change that they want to make. They have a very thin margin in Congress right now. And any sort of, if they start deciding to make major changes to it, that will require congressional approval for any sort of, substantial changes to that. And so if they want to do that, then you're subject to a very thin margin in Congress. If this goes beyond November and there isn't any sort of an agreement, and they want to make substantial changes, then they might be dealing with a new Congress and perhaps a split House and Senate. And so I think those are a lot of things that they're trying to weigh. They're trying to see how far they can push it in their negotiations. Particularly, they're maybe a little bit further along, at least publicly, with Mexico. I think next week they're scheduled to meet for a third time in a formal negotiation between the U.S. and Mexico. But I think I think they're just trying to weigh how much they can push it without perhaps congressional input.
And just to clarify, has the time period ended with Canada, but it's still ongoing with Mexico?
No.
Or is it ongoing with both of them, even though that July 1st date passed?
It's ongoing with both of them. I think you've just probably seen a little bit more publicly and formality with some of these more formal trade rounds, as they're calling them, with Mexico. But they're still talking with Canadian officials.
Okay. And Marie-France, so Canada has kept recreational boats off its applied list, even as, automobiles and steel absorbed tariffs. I'm wondering how fragile the exemption for boats is with Canada, and what kind of contingency planning should Canadian builders and dealers have in place in case it changes?
Yeah. So the fact that recreational boats are not currently on Canada's applied counter tariff list is really important, but it can't be treated as permanent. Our priority is obviously to make sure government understands the Canadian economic consequences before boats are ever added to that list. So for companies, the most valuable preparation is being, I think, able to quantify the impact of a proposed measure quickly. What would it do to landed costs, dealer inventory, customer orders, Canadian jobs, competitiveness? Like 50% of the boats sold in Canada are from the U.S. from U.S. manufacturers. So we are deeply interconnected. Sometimes that line is a bit scary to use in government because you also feel like, well, it would be a big, it would hurt the US a lot if they were to add them to that list, except it would also decimate our industry in Canada. So that's the counter argument we are playing with government, and we've kept educating them on is what we bring to the Canadian industry. So I guess the goal is not simply to know your exposure, but to be able to demonstrate immediately and credibly why adding boats would hurt Canadian businesses and consumers. So, and this evidence, like Lee and Clay talked about, this evidence gives NMMA Canada a much stronger basis to argue for continued exclusion of or targeted relief. So that's really what we're seeing. But, for everyone on the call, in Canada, we don't say USMCA. We say CUSMA because Canada comes first. The biggest shift is that, the business need to plan for ongoing uncertainty, not assume long periods of stability through this annual review. And the annual reviews don't mean annual disruption. But they do mean that trade policy has become a permanent business planning issue, not something you revisit every decade.
True. So let's switch gears and talk about something that's positive. You had a big win repealing the luxury tax on boats over 250K. And I'm curious what impact you're starting to see from when that happened. It hasn't been that long, but are you starting to see some impact from that repeal?
Yeah, I'll take a moment to acknowledge this one because it really does matter. So when the tax took effect in September 2022 on vessels over 250, our member and dealer data since then showed that sales in that segment fell by nearly 70%. So those are big numbers. That's what we pushed with, through our advocacy with government, with Finance Canada and Prime Minister's office. The business shifted to the US, manufacturers scaled back, and jobs were put at risk. The burden landed on small and medium-sized Canadian businesses, local dealership and marina operators, service workers. So we fought for 3 years. We built the coalition, the evidence, the data, the political case, and the tax was repealed in November through Budget 2025. And the early response is really encouraging. Dealers are reporting better sale conversations, renewed buyer interest. So it's too early to call for a full recovery of that segment in Canada, but the market is definitely moving again, and we're quite hopeful as we're hearing stories and contracts being signed, and there's a lot of hope in the sector. So I'll be anxious to see the data, when summer's over, to see how much we were able to get back into that segment. But the repeal doesn't solve interest rates and fuel cost and consumer confidence, but it surely removes one major barrier from an already difficult market. So,
Well, congratulations for that. And it's nice to have a bright spot to talk about with all of the pressures that are on different aspects of the industry.
Thank you.
Let's get into materials, the components that actually go on the boats, and then we'll zoom out into how Europe is kind of hedging its bets beyond the US market, something you and I spoke about in January, Philip. So between restructuring steel and aluminum tariffs, rising rates on wood and timber, a new semiconductor chip tariff that could soon expand to memory and analog chips in chart plotters and engine control units. Which of the material categories worries you the most for the second half of 2026? And what is your organization doing to hedge it? So Lee, I'm going to start with you. Which category is, of the most concern to you? Although I expect, because of the different categories that you're in, it might be a couple of them.
Of course, aluminum is the easiest one to point to because, we build aluminum boats and you just don't know what it's going to be. And 232s, I think Clay mentioned there were some wins and you get excited for those wins. But then if you flip the page, they changed the way they weigh the aluminum, which it's like 2 steps forward, 30 steps back. So it's kind of that seesaw of what is, what isn't. I think the thing that maybe concerns me or keeps me up at night is something that we don't even know about yet. We know how to handle everything that's in front of us today. We know how to handle 232s. We know what happens next week if 122s change to something else. We've accepted, USMCA is going to be this. We've got 301s. We've been dealing with that for 6, 7, 8, 9 years at this point. But it's what's behind door number 3. It's kind of that unknown of it all that I think is, it's the how do you prepare for what you don't know is the piece. But I would say if of that list that you said, certainly for our industry, aluminum is one that's problematic. Hopefully, we're all able to prove the fact that boating makes a lot of money for the economy. Boating makes a lot of money for the United States, for Canada, for Europe. We do great things in the communities where we live and work. We have tons of business. We create a lot of economic impact. So just continuously telling that story hopefully will allow us to kind of hedge some of these other kind of macro issues that we're all dealing with.
Yes. So Clay, going on to you, which category for you? Is it also aluminum, or is it, I would think some of it has to be the semiconductor chips as well.
Yeah, I would say certainly aluminum, semiconductors, you certainly like across the board. But I think it's kind of building upon like what Lee said, but it's the continued uncertainty. And I think also understanding how the various tariffs are going to stack together. There have been so many issues with that over the past year. And with so many investigations outstanding, how are these different tariffs going to stack together once these investigations are complete? I think there's just been so many issues related to the tariff implementation, and I think leaving folks in the dark or causing confusion with these quick turnaround times for when a tariff is announced, and all of a sudden it goes into effect, 2 days from now, but it may have, maybe a week prior if the component or product has already been loaded onto a vessel from whichever country and is shipped, then you should be in the clear. But if it made it to the port, like there's so many different issues with especially the implementation period, and a lot of education that has to go on with that. And so, we're just going to we continue taking advantage of the public comment periods to voice our concerns, educating policymakers and officials on our supply chain, and using those opportunities to meet directly with the trade officials to make sure that they're aware of, as Lee said, the economic impact that our industry has on this country, on communities across the country, to make sure that they're aware of what this sort of impact has on the industry.
Marie-France, anything from the Canadian perspective in terms of, a category of product that you're most concerned of?
Well, like Lee said, again, I think aluminum is the most immediate material concern for Canadian manufacturers. It's central to boats and components. So that always remains directly, exposed to tariff and retaliation risk. But electronics is obviously the underappreciated second risk that's most important. I think the modern boat is increasingly a connected device, chart plotters, a navigation system, and engine control and sensors. So like you said, Michelle, as broader semiconductor tariffs reach memory, analog, those components, the impact shows up quickly in cost and availability. And we're already seeing that, through supply chain.
Once the boats are done, someone has to be able to navigate it. So
exactly.
Those chips have to be available.
Yeah, exactly.
So Philip, you had also mentioned aluminum and steel to me, but I have another question for you. So, I had spoken earlier about how unified I thought, listening to the members of your EU government were when we met in Dusseldorf. So how unified has the EU been in responding to all of these U.S. trade policies, which keep shifting over the past year? and how actively has the EU strengthened ties with other markets, particularly the Middle East, APAC? We talked about the Mercosur area. In terms of, are they looking elsewhere for growth with, considering the uncertainty that's happening in the United States?
Yeah, definitely. And I think also, just like the industry, I think, and businesses and now policymakers, it's gone a bit from sort of short-term panic mode, quick reactions, to thinking a bit more long-term. I mean, we saw this, was it 1 or 2 weeks ago, the NATO summit in Ankara, where suddenly President Trump said, we're going to stop all trade with Spain. Well, this doesn't cause the same immediate reaction anymore that it did a couple of months ago. So a bit slower, a bit less reactive, which I think is good. And we've now gotten this sort of Turnberry golf course agreement implemented at EU level, which sort of lowers down the tariffs to 0% for a wide package of products and goods, including boats and engines coming from the US. So hopefully this will sort of facilitate and calm down the trade relationship, at least between the EU and the US, so that we can focus a bit jointly with the US government and the EU side on moving from firefighting to actually improving the trade relationship with the US. And there is a lot that we can do to support our industry. I mean, looking at the steel and aluminium tariffs, the 232 tariffs, there's still a major source of concern for our European component manufacturers and suppliers who are exporting to the US. That does cause a lot of issues. And like Lee told us earlier, all of those calculations which have changed also make it even more complicated. So all of that is good news. So hopefully we can move a bit the EU-US relationship in a better direction in the next couple of months and years. Looking at other markets, I mean, for our industry in Europe and globally, we know that Europe and North America are the key markets. There's no question about it. This is not going to change anytime soon. But of course, there's long-term growth, which is possible in other regions. And it's good that the EU has now started opening up these regions with trade agreements, such as I said, with Mercosur, with those 4 countries down in South America, but also with Australia and New Zealand, where we're close to an agreement, with India, with some of those Middle Eastern countries. So all of that is really positive news. It is not a silver bullet, but it's very important for the long-term market trends for our industry here.
Absolutely. And just to give some information to our attendees, so boats and engines are exempt from EU retaliation right now. And there's about a 15% baseline tariff on general EU goods. Yeah, that is what my research showed. So
so it's kind of 2 different things. One is the EU does have a retaliation package suspended, which they just suspend every couple of months, which does include boats. That's still the sort of hangover from many years ago from the first Trump administration. But for example, we managed to get engines off that list as a positive piece of news. But what they have now done is implemented until, I think, 2029, just after the end of Trump 2 administration, this new trade agreement that was agreed in Turnberry, Scotland, between the EU and the US, that really reduces to 0% those rates for, which were not much, very high, but which were higher than 0%. So that's positive news.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go out to something that's not pure trade, but it's definitely having an impact, and it's too immediate and important to skip. So since February 28th was the day that we started a war with Iran, the U.S. has, and it's put the Strait of Hormuz a choke point for roughly a quarter of the world's seaborne oil in intermittent lockdown. Prices have spiked, they've eased. There was a $70 barrel truce that keeps being tested. Now it seems like there's bombings that are happening again. So I wanted to ask the 4 of you how the renewed spike would hit your markets. So with the U.S. aggression against Iran and tensions in the Strait of Hormuz, what is your expectation for how that would ripple through the marine industry in your region? from a supplier perspective, cost of goods and freight, from discretionary spending, from boat fuel costs, boat sales, and boater behavior. So, Marie-France, I'm going to start with you. What are you seeing in terms of, the uncertainty in that strait and what it's doing to fuel costs and its impact on the industry?
Yeah, I think for Canada, the impact really comes through, three main channels that you kind of touched on: cost, consumer behavior, and freight reliability. So on cost, higher oil prices flow into resins and composites and transportation and packaging and general factory overhead. So even companies not importing through the Gulf still feel the price signal because energy is embedded through the entire supply chain. So these tariff pressure don't disappear when energy costs rise. They simply add to one another. So on the consumer side, fuel prices affect discretionary confidence. So boating has, I think, shown resilience to value time on the water. Everybody wants to be out on their boats, but the higher fuel prices definitely change, behavior. So if you're in Canada, you only have a few very short months to boat. So I think boaters are still going out, maybe not just traveling as far. So I think that's the impact that we're seeing is unfortunately on the consumer as well, from manufacturers to the consumer. So that's definitely what we're seeing here.
Okay. Philip, what are you seeing in Europe from it?
Quite the same as Marie-France said. I think this is the critical situation is obviously the cost increases that will come down the line. They're not coming immediately, but they will come. The general sort of uncertainty for consumers and all of that sort of playing together with all of these other big geopolitical developments that we're having. I mean, you could argue that there's also a positive piece that maybe people want to stay closer to home and take their boat out or get new equipment, but we'll see how that plays out. But the market is, I'm sure like everywhere, is tough out there in many segments. But the autumn boat shows here in Europe will show really where we stand for this year and for next year. I think that would be a really important piece. But I would definitely say, like Marie-France said, there's no lack of interest in boating or water sports. People want to get out on the water. I mean, we've had a really incredible period of good weather in Europe. I'm based in Brussels, and I don't think we've ever had 3 or 4 weeks of no rain, which is very rare in Belgium. So this has been very positive for all of Western and Central Europe for people to get out on the water. So the new boat market is a bit tough, but I'm sure it will sustain itself very well.
Yes, and with the heat that you've had, I'm sure people will want to be out on the water.
Yeah.
Lee, from your perspective?
Similar. I think it just adds another layer of inconsistent what in the world is happening. 2 days ago there's a 20% fee, and then that was quickly dropped 24 hours later. It's just kind of all right, what light are we following here? And I think the freight part of it, certainly, we're not seeing we are not seeing consumers not buy boats because of gas prices. That is, I know I've seen some stories in Bloomberg and others where that is highlighted, but because boaters don't use their boats as much as you use your car, or you go, certainly in the Midwest, you go from boat to sandbar, you turn the boat off, you're out there all day, you go right back in. We're not seeing people not boating. As a matter of fact, we're seeing a lot more usage, even with Freedom Boat Club, we're seeing a huge increase in people using the boats. So that is one area that maybe a bit of a surprise that when you see gas prices going up, it's not impacting. Now, certainly if you go from Florida to the Bahamas, it's going to cost you a lot more than it typically did. And I'm sure there's a little trepidation there. But I think to add to what others were saying, the freight part of it, but it's, again, and I say yes, and it's just another element of the unknown. It's just another element of what do we need to prepare for if they bomb them again tonight, if this continues, or we might wake up tomorrow and it all stops. So it's just kind of that, like, what is going to happen the next day?
Yes. And Clay, I thought it was interesting. I was in a session at the ICOMIA conference with an economist that is associated with NMMA, and he had some data that showed, based on surveys that they had done, that it wasn't going to have a big impact on how people use their boats.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's similar to like what Lee is seeing on the ground with that. I mean, you're certainly, for some, it's a livelihood. While it is a discretionary purchase for some, it's a livelihood for others. And so folks are still going to be able to get out on the water. Maybe they are boating closer to home, reducing the frequency of outings, but like folks are still going to be able to get out there. But I think, I think Lee had a great point in saying that, it just is another layer of that uncertainty. And I think there is, certainly like the trickle down effect. I think of like a recreational boat. I mean, I'm from West Virginia originally, not the biggest boating state, but I think about, this time of year when we would always take our, yearly vacation to the beach, and it always involved, a fishing trip and chartering, going out with the captain on a recreational boat. But they would take it out, and I'm sure like the fuel costs have been added to that. They've probably increased their prices a little bit. And what's that trickle down, effect going to be? And so I think certainly it adds just another layer of complexity and to this, uncertain environment that we're in.
Absolutely. So we're almost out of time. So I'm going to ask one more question. I'm looking for a concrete answer from each of you, not a wish list. So if you had to leave this audience with one concrete action that they could take before the end of this year to protect supply chains and margins in these, uncertainty has been the number one word used in this webinar. But in these uncertain geopolitical conditions, what advice would you give this audience? So Clay, I'm going to go back to you first.
Sure. I would say with this, and just kind of sticking on the trade and tariff front, but like as we saw with the IEEPA tariffs and the subsequent Supreme Court decision, I would say continue keeping your receipts. Like, yes, Section 301 tariffs and Section 232 tariffs have a much better chance to withstand legal scrutiny, but there's going to be legal challenges in court. Obviously from the Section 122 tariffs that you mentioned earlier, Michelle, but there's always going to be legal scrutiny for this. And so it's better to be safe than sorry, should any opportunities arise in the future. And so I would just say continue to keep your receipts on this and staying informed.
Well, and one thing we didn't talk about was in the BBB or the Big Beautiful Bill, there are some positives that manufacturers can take advantage of, some depreciation, some help for manufacturers in terms of buying equipment. I don't know if you want to speak to some of that they could take advantage of as well.
Certainly, yeah. There's a number of provisions, some of which became permanent in this law, but you certainly have provisions in there related to research and development that you can now deduct in the same year in which they were applied versus having to spread it out over several years. You can now do that in the same year, which is going to help save manufacturers a whole lot of money. You have the bonus depreciation, you have qualified expenses for machinery purchases, like you just mentioned. So there are certainly several in there that, certainly would take advantage of if you can and have the time to be able to do that. But there certainly are some provisions in there that we've heard from, small businesses and manufacturers being able to take advantage of that have been able to help them out quite a bit.
That's great. Lee, what is your advice to the audience?
I would say continue to shout from the rooftops, advocacy. In years past, we've all gone to DC once a year for American Boating Congress. It's not enough. We have to do all the time. They need to hear from us. I think Philip does an incredible job. Anytime I go to Brussels and with him, you walk the hall, people know who EBI is. They know who the boating industry is. They know the impact that the boating industry makes. Between Philip and Marie-France to be able to get our stuff off of the naughty list, if you will. It's incredible to see that, there's a connected fight around the world, and it's not enough to fly up once a year and sit in a room with 50 people. It is constant. And I would just say, reach out, invite your members to your facilities, show them what you do, show them the impact that you have on the families of the manufacturers that work there, and also show them what would happen if you didn't exist, if you weren't there, and the job loss and the situation they would create. I would just say, we got to continuously bang the drum on this.
Yes, and to that end, I would also say, fill out the prior approval form and donate to our boat pack for the industry if you're an American, because it's important. It's important to get in front of those senators and congressmen, and this is one of the ways that we do it. So, Marie-France, what about you?
I guess the one recommendation would, which I think everybody has run by now, but run that tariff shock exercise, before year end. And the goal is not another spreadsheet. It's a decision ready playbook, which a lot of people already have. But Lee mentioned it earlier, scenarios A, B, and C, be prepared for. But what about scenario K or J? Because these days you don't know what's going to happen. So choose another realistic scenario: a new tariff, a major output, an expanded Canadian retaliation list. What gets repriced? What gets resourced? How much inventory can you carry? So I think that's the exercise to do. And when companies can quantify the impact of a specific product line or for their company, it puts NMMA, for example, in a much stronger position to make a big case for relief to protect our industry. But again, I will echo what Lee has said, show up, keep showing up, talk to your elected officials, demonstrate the size of our industry. And it's not a once in a year, at ABC or our Day on the Hill here in Ottawa. It's constant. And it's those conversations to make sure we're always top of mind. That's really going to help and protect all of our industry.
And Philip, from you?
It's always tough being the last one after everything has been said, but definitely what Lee and Marie-France and Claire have said is all correct. And I think this advocacy work is so important. We just heard two great examples with the luxury tax being abolished, with that boating loan tax maybe disappearing. So all of that is really positive development. It can only happen through advocacy. So to support the trade association, wherever in Europe and in Canada and in the US, is really, really important. I think that's the main message I would give.
And one final question in this, Clay, is for, I'll go to you on this. So you're in DC right now. It's an interesting time. There may be two more positions in the Senate that are open. The midterms are in November. What could a shift in Congress actually do to this landscape?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's, if there is a shift in Congress, it will, certainly have an effect on a wide range of federal government policies, and on trade specifically, certainly watching how the majority would shake out in the House of Representatives. If the majority were to flip to Democratic control, you would certainly see the House Ways and Means Committee exercise significantly more oversight over USTR and the administration's trade policy. This likely means more hearings, more scrutiny of many of the trade deals that have happened and are ongoing. And Ambassador Greer, the head of the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, he's going to be spending a lot more time on Capitol Hill. But as we've experienced with much of the policy over the last 18 months, a lot of this is in the executive branch, not requiring congressional input on tariffs. And so certainly the scrutiny will increase, but the tariffs are likely to remain.
I am going to go to questions, and Clay, thank you for that. I think it's going to be an interesting time in November to see what happens, not only who gets elected, but how the election goes. But we do have one question, and I would encourage the audience, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section for us. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. So this question from Carlos Brito: do you know of any other specific companies that have successfully obtained tariff refunds? If so, are you able to share any examples or common practices they followed and categories? Additional additionally, what has the overall process been like? And what is the typical timeline for receiving a refund? And I would say Clay and Lee, if either one of you want to speak to that.
Lee, I'm happy to go first if you'd like. Yeah,
sure.
I mean, I think on this, certainly we've heard from certain manufacturers that have been able to do this. I think it's up to your individual company, and I think working with your customs brokers, with your legal teams, your different experts that you have on staff to be able to go through that. I think CBP, the Customs and Border Protection, they have a robust or somewhat robust FAQ guide on their website to kind of help walk you through all of these steps. I think Lee made a great point about, making sure that you have the correct date and information. I think it's important to have certainly the dates, the different receipts, when you pay these tariffs, how you paid them, et cetera. Are you the importer of record? I think those are certainly important. I mean, they're not going to make it easy for you to get money back from the government, to be honest with you. So they are, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny with how you apply for it. I will say though, in talking with our trade council as well about this and them working with different companies, folks, when they filled out their correct information and got it all submitted and everything was, all the I's were dotted, the T's were crossed, they got a refund pretty quickly with it. And so I think it's just all dependent on working with, your legal counsel, whether it's importer of record, not the importer of record, but working with your customs brokers as well on how quickly that information or that refund would come back to your business.
And I think to the other part of the question, the companies we've heard of are usually typically the big ones. You don't hear about everybody,
right.
But the DHLs and the FedExes and Target, Walmart, Ford, General Motors, they've all applied. They've all received refunds. Those are the ones that get written about in CNBCs and others. But as Clay said, it is truly, there's the CAPE portal, and you got to follow it. And this is another one of those things. It's not like there's precedent. It's not like, you remember 10 years ago when we did this? So everybody's starting from this ground zero and just making sure that everything lines up, because it is one little misstep, they will find it and make sure that they don't want to do this. Obviously, the government does not want to do this. So if you make it easy for them not to, they'll do it too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No one wants to give money back. So if you follow the instructions to the T, there's an opportunity there, but you're going to have to follow the instructions to the T. I don't see any other questions in our Q&A section. So I'd like to thank Marie-France, Philip, Clay, and Lee for joining us today. Thank you to our sponsor, Brunswick Corporation, and all of you for attending. There is the one sheet. Oh, wait, we do have one more question. Does the panel have any advice for small businesses seeking refunds but no staff or legal teams? I've read the info on the CAPE portal and it's clear as mud. Is there a place to start? Clay, has NMMA put together anything that's kind of a bullet point on how to deal with CAPE?
Yeah, I'm happy if whoever had reached out with that question, if they want to reach out to me or Michelle, if you have their contact information, I'm happy to discuss with them, maybe help walk them through the process as well. But anything that we can do to be helpful on that. Okay.
John, I will, great, reach out to Clay. Okay. So I did get a question on if you could share the handout that is up there. Yes, you can absolutely share that handout with whomever you'd like to. And sorry, questions keep coming in, but I think we're good. So Soundings Trade Only will continue to keep you informed. So please read the e-news. Please read the monthly magazine. We'll keep you informed of any changes in tariffs, trade, and taxes. Our next event will actually be at IBEX on October 7th, our Marine Ideas Exchange or Mix event. Stay tuned for more information about that. And we wish you all a great rest of your summer. Stay informed, and thank you for being here.